Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone. It's awesome to see this many people in the room. I was pretty much sure that I would beat, because yesterday I heard someone had 13 people in the room. I was pretty sure that I would have less. So I'm actually quite happy. Just for fun, how many of you have seen any kind of presentation like this before that talks about design in Windows development? Like 3 hands. So if we keep that hand-going thingy, and we say, how many of you have been to a Microsoft keynote where they say, experiences is everything, it has to be well-designed? Isn't it kind of weird that they do that and then they don't cover this topic? So I'm here. I'm the guy that tries to do it. So my name is Chris Klug. I work as a senior software developer for a small company in Sweden called Active Solution. We do custom software development on the Microsoft platform. And I've focused heavily on Microsoft since the beginning of my career. And I've also spent massive amounts of time using Silverlight and getting Silverlight and MVVM to work in a way that I could work with design part of me that I'm very interested in, but also the developer part of me. Unfortunately, I had no one to collaborate with. So this presentation is about my two sort of personalities working together. But it can be other people involved as well. So that's basically me. Me kind of unimportant. If you want to get in contact with me, you have my details there. I do answer emails. I do answer Twitter, just any questions. I will also be around here after the session if you have any questions. And I am actually staying here for the entire conference. So I don't leave until tomorrow morning. So I will be wandering the halls, hopefully, or probably alone in about 2 hours. So if you have anything to ask, just grab me and ask. So, how many of you have seen this thing? Oh, yes. I did this in the US. Not for TechEd US, because there were actually a lot of Europeans in that session. I've done it in the US for a US audience. And I go, how many of you have seen this? And there's not a single hand going up. And I go, I got 4 more slides about citrus juicers. This is not going to go well. So for those of you who haven't seen this is a citrus juicer that was designed by Philip Stark in... Sorry, that just creaks too much. By Philip Stark in 1990. It is probably the most famous citrus press ever being designed. It is also what is considered an iconic industrial design element. It's been displayed at things like Museum of Modern Art. It is in loads of movies. I don't own one, but every time I walk into a store, I'm about that close to buying one. Unfortunately, when I walk into stores carrying this thing, my wife is always there. She won't let me. But I did get one for my brother. But the interesting thing with this is it's actually not that good. It's actually not a good juicer. It actually does a pretty poor job. It sprays stuff all over the place. There are pits in your juice. And it kind of doesn't work. And to take that even further, Alessi, who builds this, have actually gone and produced a gold version of this. It comes in a little wooden plate. It's numbered. There are 1,000 of them available, I think. And it's in gold. Does anyone know why making one of these out of gold is a bad idea? Acid in the citrus, together with gold, is actually not that good for you. So it's actually poisonous. So it has a note saying, do not use it. Kind of explains this is what you get when you have someone like Philip Stark, a brilliant designer, go out on a tangent and do whatever he wants, not thinking about functionality. So this would be my presentation of the designer. This is what you get when you put a designer in a room and tell him, do what you want. This, however, is what you get when you put a developer in a room and tell him to build a juicer. You laugh. It's like... just one little pointer that most people don't notice. This thing is called the Juicy Salif. This thing is called the Philips HR2744-/40. This is remarkably boring. It is by far, and I mean by massive amounts, the better product. It has a little motor in there, so it does the work for you. You only have to hold your lemon or your orange or whatever you're squeezing. It's got little things you can pour it straight into your glass. It's got a little sieve at the top, taking care of all the pits. It's a handle. It's got rubber at the bottom, keeping it stably on the kitchen counter. It's a brilliant product. It is never entering my home. It looks like crap. If I put that in my home, it's going to be on a shelf somewhere where I can't see it, like in a cupboard. It will be out of view, and I might pull it out once in a while. That, my friend, is what you designers build, or you developers build. I'm sorry, but that's just a general, you will be building this. If you take these two, you take Philip Stark and you take whatever not very brilliant design-wise guy who built this into the same room, and you let them to cooperate and build something together, you will get something like this. It is still the HR2752/90. They could give it a better name. But this is actually, it looks a lot better. This is something I could pick up at the store, and I could go home and I could put it on the counter in my kitchen. I can go, looks good enough to be around. But it has all the same feature. It has a motor. It looks good. It has that little spout thingy so I can pour it straight in my glass. It takes care of the pits. It does all the stuff that the other ugly version did, but it's not juicy as a leaf, but it looks okay. And that's the goal with the ideas I have around the developer-designer workflow, the fact that we get the good developer to do all of the mechanics and all of the functional stuff, but we get the designer to come in and actually make it look pretty. Same thing works with phones. So far to your left is a Nokia N70. Awesome phone. Anyone ever own it? Yeah. Good phone? It was an awesome phone. It could do everything you wanted, but the UI looks like crap. It's a typical developer thing. Yes, there have been designers involved in that, but they've been pretty clearly controlled by the developers as well, saying we can do this, we can't do that. Then at the same time, pretty much, they had Windows Mobile. Windows Mobile was an awesome operating system. And I mean that. Most people saying that are sarcastic. I actually mean it. It was an awesome operating system. Not in the phone. It was a complete failure as a phone. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the operating system actually gave you features that no other phone on the market today can compare themselves with. When iPhone came out, which is the next one here, it came out and didn't even have MMS, which was a basic feature that every single other phone on the market had. But you know what? Nobody cared. When I ask people about, so you're getting a phone that doesn't even have a basic feature like MMS, they go, well, I don't really do send that many SMS. Like every single feature I brought up is like, it's lacking this thing. They go, I don't really use that much. Apple got away with releasing a subpar phone for the very simple reason that it looked cool. It was a new thing. It was user-friendly. There was more design. There was more form and design than there was function in it. People don't care. It looks good. It's cool. And then Microsoft, according to me, upped it one more time and released Windows Phone, which is another step in that evolution, making it even simpler and even more user-focused than I think iOS is. And then, not too long ago, Apple decided to take iPhone, or Windows Phone's UI, move it into iPhone, and call it iOS 6, and then barf it up with like rainbow-colored pixels. But other than that, they lead the market still, and they do it based on usability and functionality being second-rate. It's all about how you interact with it, the experience you're getting from it. And experience is a good word, because I keep saying that to people building like line of business applications. You have to build an experience, and they go, no, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. I'm building a WinForms application. It's got like 600 buttons, 15 tabs, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 little input boxes. I don't care about an experience. It's a line of business application. You know what? It's not going to fly anymore. People take that app at work and they hate it because they go home and they pick up their iPad or their Surface and they have an experience. They have like this engulfing experience that gives them so much more, and that's what they're going to be expecting out of developers for all of their applications in the future. So have that in mind when you start doing your new applications. There's a saying that says there is no such thing as no design, only bad design. I love that saying in two ways. I love it, first of all, from a visual, graphical design perspective, but I also love it from an architectural, IT sort of developer kind of perspective. Going and saying, no, we're not doing any design, is not saying that there will be no design in your application. It's just a matter of saying, we're going to make it crap. So doing no design is saying we're going to do bad design. Don't go there. It will fail. And I love that. It's like, I believe. I do believe in a lot of things. And I do believe in this area specifically that if we let the designers go ahead and be designers and be whatever they are, to make them do whatever they're intended to do, they will come up with beautiful things. And if we take developers and we let them go into whatever they want to do and make them build beautiful software, they will make amazing things that will do all of these awesome features. And if you put them together, you will have more than just awesome features and a good design. It will just grow together and become this awesome application. So make sure that you use both sides of it. I know that I'm probably fairly odd in our community because I am a software developer and I focus on design, or development mostly, but I was supposed to become an art director. That was my main focus. My main goal was to work with design. But taking those two together, and all of a sudden you're seeing that some of the things that we're poking out because I am focused on design is so much more. I don't believe that Microsoft has managed to sell this. I would even go, and this is probably going to get me kicked out of TechEd in the future, I would even say that Microsoft has gone so far as failed completely when it comes to this. And the unfortunate thing is, they haven't failed by not giving us the tools. They have failed by not selling the tools. It's a PR marketing thing that's just failed. They haven't gone through with it. How many of you guys have used Blend? Keep your hands up. How many of you love Blend? Okay, that didn't go so well. So just remove your hands. We'll just go back again. Now, the thing is, Blend is one of those tools that Microsoft marketed a little bit. It came out with WPF, and a few people used it, and then it came out with Silverlight, and a few people used it. But most people didn't use it. It was a completely different tool. It's way different from Visual Studio, but it's also way different from Photoshop. So it puts it in the middle of everything, and it's hard for a lot of people to figure out. But it is by far the coolest tool in the Microsoft toolbox, except for possibly Visual Studio, which is just a little bit better. But it just enables those things that I'm talking about. But how many of you guys have actually been to a session about Blend? Once again, massive failure. How many of you have been to a session about Visual Studio? Exactly. That's the way it is. I'm trying to change it. It's going slowly. I'm kind of alone, but I will be fighting until I win. So before I get started going even further into the actual workflow and the actual what I'm trying to sell here is, I do generalize. I do put people into little holes and like you're like this, you're like that. Developers drink Jolt Cola sitting in a basement somewhere and they have thick glasses and a big beard. Designers wear funky clothes and work on Macs and kind of stuff like that. It's not to give you get you feeling bad. It's much easier to draw a line and say developers are like this and designers are like that. Because if we start looking at all of the mixes in between, it becomes really muddled. So if you feel bad after anything I've said, welcome to come up and fight me or whatever. But it's not. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I promise. How many people would know what this is? I don't know. This is the human brain. If you were one of those people not putting your hands up, I can tell you this is the human brain. It's placed somewhere around here on most people. It is an amazing little thing. It makes us who we are. It makes everything about us. And so far, however good we are at computing and computers, we have not been even close at creating something as complex, as cool as this. The left-hand side of the brain is considered the logical part of the brain. It's the developer part. It's where we look at advanced patterns. We're looking at building complex features into software. It's the development part. It's the boring, logical, this is what I've got, this is what I'm going to be building, this is the way life is. The thing that says there are massive amounts of rules and I can't break them. The right-hand side is a way different. It's the creative part. It's the designer part. It's the part of the brain that goes and says, this is what we have. I don't really care if there are rules. I'm going to break it. I'm going to do all of this other stuff. I'm going to be free and flowing, and I'm going to be a little bit of a hippie. That's a whole different part of the brain. And you know what? How many have heard that explanation before? Hands up. It is complete bull. There's no scientific proof whatsoever in that statement, or in those statements. There's no scientific thing saying that. It's just from a popular psychology point of view, it's easier, once again, to split it down the middle and go, it's like this and it's like that. But if we were to have these two halves, they do fit in pretty well to developers versus designers. We use different parts. So let's look at the players that we have working in this workflow. The first guy we've got is the guy I assume most people are in here, the developer. The developer is responsible for making it work, very simply, just functionality. It's also the part that makes me really sad, because my wife is not in our line of business at all. And I remember several years ago when I was kind of new in the business, I would come home and I would be really proud about something I'd built. I would show off. We were building this online sports betting system. And I would come home and I would show her when we launched the site. And I was like, really cool, you can bet on different sports. And it's like, have you seen all of this? And she looks, it looks really pretty. Yeah, I didn't do that. That was a designer. So what do you actually do? She asked me. It's like, you know when you click that button? That posts a bunch of information to a server. That server organizes that and finds some information in the database, and then it runs off. This was in Sweden. So it runs off to Australia, to a server down in Australia, and makes some changes in the database there, and gets a little number back from that goes into a database in Sweden that does make sure that we're not going over budget and basically going beyond what we're allowed to be gambling for the license that we have. And then that comes back and gives you a receipt saying that this is what you've bet. She just looked at me with hollow eyes and she goes, it looks really pretty. So that's what we do. We do all of that stuff behind the scenes that, to be perfectly honest, everybody just takes for granted, but nobody really goes and cares about it deeply. It's just, yeah, well, it's supposed to be like that. And yes, I've also added the two last ones, if you wonder. We do add bugs and we do fix bugs. We generally add more than we fix, unfortunately, but that's the way life goes. The designer, on the other hand, is way different. The designer is just focused on making it look pretty, right? That's what the designer does. He puts in pink backgrounds and little fluffy clouds. That's what he does. Not quite true. I have the deepest respect for designers, and I am now using designer in a very broad term. I know there are information architects, which are kind of designers as well, and then you've got visual design people, and you've got experience design people, but to be perfectly honest, I've never worked in a company that has more than a designer, and he does all of it, so I'm going to be kind of broad. I have, as I said, the utmost respect for these people, because they are creative on a clock. They come to work, and they are creative. If you've ever tried to be told, hey, today you're going to be creative for 8 hours, you are not going to be creative. I'm sorry. It's just going to stifle you. You're just going to go, I can't be creative today. But they do more, and that's the thing. Most people think they go in and they do visual design, they do fluffy little clouds, and it looks good and everything. They get all the fame for the application. There's actually a lot of study and a lot of knowledge going into where to place things on the screen, what colors to use, how to combine colors, how to do this and how to do that. And when you start reading up and you start working with these people, you understand that it's not just them sitting there with a little brush going, I'm going to do that, and oh, that looks good. You can build this. They actually do have massive amounts of knowledge. But they make the experience. They basically take whatever you're going to make functional, and they make it an experience. They make it more than just a button and a pop-up that says, I'm done. The developer has this really boring communication method. He talks to the team lead, to the developing team, and potentially to the so-called product owner, which is some dude that's responsible for making decisions. Not necessarily, and that's kind of funky. The product owner is rarely the guy actually using the system. It is generally a guy, sort of middle management at the company, who knows that other people will be using the system, so he's just guessing about what they're going to be doing with it. That's the guy that we get to talk to. The designer, on the other hand, gets to talk to the product owner, but generally talk to more people at the customer as well. Or if it's internally, I'm just saying customers, the person ordering the system. They get to talk to more people and figure out what's the look and feel? What's this company trying to convey with this application? What's the feeling that they're trying to give out with this application? So they do a bunch of other stuff and talk to other people. But as you can see, they're not talking to the same people. They're pretty separate in who they're talking to. Tools, well, you know the dev tools, Visual Studio. I put Expression Blend in there because I have this little hope that developers might actually pick that up. Having seen how many of you actually love that tool, I assume that you don't have it in your toolbox. It comes with Visual Studio. It's released together with Visual Studio completely. It's not a separate product anymore. Try using it. It's actually quite sweet. And then we use Team Foundation Server or Git or whatever source control system we have. And yeah, Bing Google. It's like the most important tool that we can have. Like I would probably rather have Bing and Notepad than Visual Studio. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. The designer, completely different tools once again. They are different people. They draw on paper, fastest way of doing it. They wireframe things in Balsamic. They do visual design in Adobe. They might use Expression Design, which I don't even know if it's alive anymore. It's actually not that great of a tool. It was a good idea, but it's not what Microsoft does. They build development tools basically, not designer tools like that. So they use other tools, tools that most of us don't work very well with, unfortunately. So the problem with those is, as I've said over and over, very different. They don't use the same tools. They don't talk to the same people. They don't do the same thing. They don't use the same parts of their brain. It's going to be really hard to get those two to work together. Someone before me actually did this, but introduced a new role in the team that's building software. It's called the diviner. It's also been called the dev signer and the whatever. It's basically just the idea of combining a developer and a designer into one role. I call myself a diviner because I have 1 foot in design and 1 foot in development. So we need to have that guy in the middle that makes it possible for them to work together. What does he do? Well, he takes the visual stuff that the designer has built and all of the look and feel that the designer wants and converts that into a functional UX. Generally, from my presentation, that UX is going to be XAML, but it potentially may be somehow way in form possible to do it in HTML and JavaScript as well, but I'm going to leave that unsaid. And they add like transitions and UX features and all of that, and basically takes what the developer builds, what the designer designs, and becomes a guy in the middle that basically makes everything work. He's got the coolest job of it all, because he doesn't have to have thick glasses and a big beard, and he gets credit for building all of the beautiful stuff. Talks to the development team and the designer. So once again, just the guy in the middle, communicating with both of them, making sure that the development team is producing the functionality that he needs to complete his task, but he's also making sure that the designer is designing what needs to be there for the development stuff to work, and also, very important part, understanding what the designer is thinking. Because once the designer has handed off the designs, you have to be sure that you understand the thought behind it. And that's where this guy comes in. Once again, tools, in the middle, Adobe. How many of you guys have like Photoshop installed on your machines? It's pretty good. How many of you can actually use Photoshop? Okay, so I'm going to do that in half, because, yeah. But it's actually that uncommon. When I go to a new company, I've moved a couple of times, and I ask for Photoshop, they just look at me and go, no, you're a developer. You got Visual Studio, that comes with MSDN. We're not paying for Photoshop. You might be able to use GIMP if you want to. It's like, yeah, not the same thing. Give me a fully fledged tool. But also Blend, Visual Studio, TFS, somewhere in the middle of both platforms. Okay, so I'm going to kind of stop fluffing about and actually show you what the workflow I'm supposed to be showing off looks like. So I've invented this application. So just assume I'm working at a company, I'm a software developer, I'm sitting at Active Solution, and the client comes in and says, I'm going to build a Twitter app. Or actually, you're going to build a Twitter app for me. I need a Twitter app. Never going to happen. It's never, ever going to happen that someone walks in to a consultant agency and says, can I get a Twitter app? But it's the best thing I could come up with, sorry. So it's called Tweetalicious. And The designer, me in that case, have sat down with the fictional customer. Can you just see this meeting? Me and my made-up customer sitting in that room, working out, trying to figure out what we're building. That was a weird meeting. But we come up with this awesome wireframe diagram. How many of you have seen balsamic? How many of you use balsamic on a regular basis? And what are you guys doing in here? Because apparently you know Photoshop, you know balsamic, you're way beyond what I'm trying to show here. But I've used that, and I've made these wireframes. And for those of you who don't know balsamic, it's a cheap tool that you can download, and it has a bunch of controls and stuff, and you can make these wireframes really fast. And I've tried to convince some people at my office that we should use it way more, but it's kind of hard. But I have used it with a couple of clients, and you should see the clients' faces when I'm sitting there with my laptop and I'm doing my thing at the meeting. The client is there talking to someone else at the company, and they're talking about what they're building and all of it. And after about half an hour, after talking about what we're building, I turn my laptop around and I go, so something like this, and they look at it and they go, exactly, that's what we need, but we need this button and we need to switch this and move this a little bit. And then we have it like, this is what we're building. So a simple wireframe for a Twitter application, pretty similar. It's what it would look like if I built a Twitter app, kind of. And then when you've got that, you want client approval. And this is by far, to me, one of the most important steps for two reasons. So, sorry, once again a question. How many of you work as consultants for external customers? Half of you, okay. Client approval is an awesome thing. Because you give this to the client, and you say, do we agree? This is what we're building. Client goes, yeah. Client signs a paper saying, this is what we're building. Client comes back 3 weeks later, says, when we've built the first prototype, and he says, no, we should have this feature as well. You go, you pull out the wireframe, you see, do you see that button on here? No. We weren't building that. We want that, we can add that button in, but it's extra cost. So it's actually a very, very, like, line coming down, going, like, strict going, this is what we're building. Everything outside of that will be extra time, extra money, extra scope, whatever, but this is what we're building. I love having that to come back to and say, if it's not in here, we're not building it. So we've got client approval, and then one of the developers or the diviner and the designer sits down and starts pulling the wireframes apart. So what we've just built, we start tearing into pieces. And having done this a couple of times, it becomes really, really just second nature. I see a wireframe like that, my head directly just spins off and goes, this should be a view model that looks like this would be included in that, and then there's going to be this going to be that. I'm going to pull this out, I'm going to make another view model of that. That's how my head works now. It used to be I saw something like that, and I would get like a database diagram in my head. I know that's kind of messed up, and it's actually beginning in exactly the wrong end. Like, I'm going to start as far and deep down into the application as I can, and then I'm going to build that up, and then at the end, when we have no time left, I'm just going to slap a UI on top of it, and you get WinForms. Sorry. So I pull this apart, and I come up with this little simpler view that says, this is going to be a view model called main view model, and it needs a little... Does this have it has a pointy thing. I'm apparently not supposed to use that as a speaker, but it's got like a little input thing here where I input my new tweet. That goes to my tweet text, which is a get and set. We've got a button here, tweet, goes to send tweet. So all of these little things are just split apart. So I got that little thing that's a button, that goes to show feed, and then there's show message, there's show favorite, which is down there. Then we've got a list of tweets, which is up there. And we've got selected author out here. When I click on the author, I want to see who wrote that. That becomes the selected author. And I've also figured out that I'm going to need like an author view model and a tweet view model to identify those parts of the system. But this code that I'm writing here, even a designer can understand that. It's actually, that's pretty simple to figure out. And just a simple explanation, this is what we're building. We know that. Then after that, I take the other parts. I keep just pulling apart. All the stuff that I grayed out in here needs to be pulled out and maintained or handled as well. So tweet view model, Every single tweet has its own little view model. I need an author picture, and I need an author name, and when it was published, and I need to be able to reply and retweet and favorite and stuff like that. And then this developer or designer comes in and says, so we're doing an image here. You as a designer can just ignore this, but we're building an extra view model for that, for images. You should always put in an extra view model for images. You learn that at your first project, and then that just comes with you for every other project along the way. Because an image takes time to download. The image is going to come from Twitter, so we need to run off to Twitter and get that file, which may take time. That was what I was saying. And I want to have a little is loading thing. So I want to make it possible to have a little spinning icon or something like that saying, I am loading the image. Or I could have like a fallback image until the image is loaded. So a few little things like that. The designer will just go, I don't care, just do what you want as long as I get to design what I'm designing. And author view model, same thing there. Once again, pull out that little part, figure out what kind of properties we need to display it, what data we need, what buttons we need. And just every single button just goes to that button just goes to a command. Every little piece of text goes to a property. It's about that simple. Is there anyone in here who doesn't think this is simple? Okay, so nobody will admit that, but I really hope that that is the fact, because it's actually, if you think this is complicated, you're not going to get very far with building applications, because this is pretty much as simple as you can make it. So what do we get out of pulling the wireframes apart? Most importantly, we get a mutual understanding of what we're building. We got a designer that's up to speed what he's going to be designing, what he needs to deliver, and we get a developer that knows what he's building and what he needs to create and test and build and whatever you want to do. And of course we get like peace, love, and understanding and unicorns and double rainbows and all of that stuff that we just get when things work. And VM stub interfaces. So doing XAML development and C#, we should always use model view view model. Having view models for that have like interfaces, stubbed out interfaces like this are much easier to implement because we know what we're building. So we can take those stubs and we can run off and start building as developers while the designer runs off and starts designing stuff. Because in the end, they're just going to marry up and start working. And that's the cool thing, because now we can start multitasking. Now we can stop saying that, oh, these guys are going to sit in a room and they're going to work together in parallel. Like now we can just split out. Now we know the VMs are going to look in a specific way. So the developer can run off and do his thing. The designer can run off and do his thing. And they can work in parallel and shortening the time that we need to get the application into the market. Designer runs off, creates visual design. Developer sets up. And it does take a little while to set up a project. We all know that. Getting the correct solution file with the right names for the projects and getting it into source control. And if you're as anal as I am, my solution has to be perfect. I don't know why. It's just it has to look the right way for me to get it to work. So we do that. And we also create stub VMs. And I'll come back to stub VMs. You'll see how they look. Create a basic UI. We need to, at this point, to create a UI that we as developers can use while we build the application. It's going to look like a car crash, but it gives us all the buttons and all of the text boxes and text blocks and images and all of that we need to make sure it works. So we can build our stuff, and it can look like a car crash, but we'll get all of the information flowing through and all the functionality flowing through. So we need a basic UI. And then we create a way to get the basic UI that we got to use the stubs that we're building. Diviner, he's just helpful. He's just going to run around being, hey, I can help out. Because depending on who you're putting here, he can either help the designer to do some visual stuff, or he can be the guy setting up the solution. Depends on who you got. Or he can be a guy in the middle, and in that case, he's just going to sit there and twiddle his thumb, or be on another project. So let's have a look at how we do a dev UI and how we do stub VMs. Every time I tilt my head down, it gets really loud, and I'm going to go. And they've made these little podiums for midgets. So I'm going to see if I can sit down. I'm sorry for that, but I can barely reach my laptop otherwise. So I've got this application here called DarksideCookie Tweedlicious.client. It's a simple store app. I have done nothing with it, I promise. There's no magic, like pre-baked, this is what I did before, it looks like this. I just created it because it means that I get the right namespace, so I don't mess up the namespace while typing, and all of my other stuff fails. So I'm just going to add a new project in here. I'm going to create a Windows Store class library project. And I'm going to call it DarksideCookie Tweedlicious Design Time. Like that. Very simple. There's nothing complicated in here at all. It's just a regular class library. Did any of you attend my other session earlier this week? So just ignore everything I said that session. Because I'm so going to break everything I said I would Freddy Krueger you for. But that's just because it's simpler to do it this way from a just simple point of view. So I create these design time view models, and I create one for every kind of view model that I've decided. So in this case, I needed a main view model, like that. I'll rename that. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say main view model. And that's how you all develop, right? You just rate the name of the class and enter, and it just appears. It is pretty awesome with Visual Studio. The power of Visual Studio is great. But the thing is, it's except for me snippeting it in, it looks pretty much like the one I showed you before. The only thing is now a class. I have, instead of just declaring a get, I do put in a private set. I have exactly the same properties. I have a constructor in here that hard codes all of the information. This could be hard coded like this, or it could be read out of memory. I will talk about that in a little while. But basically, I'm just hard coding all of the stuff that I need to create a design time view, which I can start working with. So it's just a stupid little view model. It has nothing interesting in it. It just has to look exactly like the view model that I will be building when building the application. If you collapse that, I think there's a... And once again, you just write a little bit, press enter, and you get massive amounts of code. You go, everything in here is good. That thing needs to be in there. So I've created my other view models in here. So once again, they're just as simple. There's an author view model, there's the tweet view model, and they're just simple things. They're just hard-coded values. And there's the image view model. And here comes a little kicker that you have to know, otherwise you'll fail. Because I've failed over and over again, and it took me ages to figure this out. Any code you put into a view model and use in Visual Studio will run its constructor, but it will not run any code going async or going off doing anything else. So it will run the constructor, but nothing else. So if I want to run off and pick up an image, like I want to go to disk and read it, or I want to run off to the web and download it for me, not going to work. So if you want to put images in here, you have to take something like, what am I pulling out? Design time resources sounds like a good thing. Just rename that resources. Just going to add an image in here, like that. And make sure that, so where's window, view, where do you find the properties window? F4. I love having developers in the room. They're like keyboard jockeys. So I take this and I change it to embedded resource. That means that I actually embed all of my images that I want to show at design time into my assembly, because I'm allowed to read out of my assembly, but I'm not allowed to leave the assembly and go and get the file somewhere else. So that just anything you need to read from in your design time view model has to be a resource embedded into your assembly. Then I just got this little piece of code here that pulls out the assembly manifest resource stream and pulls out the resource for me. That, once again, it's bitten me so many times trying to get that going. So just knowing what you can do in design time versus runtime is pretty good to have. Next thing on my list of things to do to get this running is to go up to my client. And I always put all of my views in a folder called, anyone want to guess? Views. Just one place to put them. I actually generally try to remove even the main page.xaml and move that into views so they're all in one place. And those of you who heard me said I have a messy head at my previous session, It is messy. It's just I need to get everything else in order to handle the fact that my head is a really weird place. So in here, I add a new view. It's going to add a new page. Say Windows Store blank page called main view. Like that. And as you don't want to see me sit here and type a massive amount of XAML, I'm just going to go in here, and I'm going to pull out mainview.xaml and replace the XAML part of it, like that. And I get this ugly UI. It's like it's got all of the elements that I had in my design time, or in my wireframe, but it looks like a car crash. But here's the problem with this car crash. It's a stupid car crash because I don't actually see anything, right? So what I need to do is I need to hook up my design time view model that's just there for design to work together with this view. So while I'm in Blend or in Visual Studio, I want to be able to get that view model and show off that information. And it's actually really simple. You just go in here and you go data context equals. I'm not saying that the syntax is the most elegant and useful, but you go design instance. Then you go type, type equals, and then you go VM main view model. Then you press Alt-Enter if you have ReSharper installed. That was not what I wanted. Apparently you don't press Alt-Enter even if you have ReSharper installed. So what you do is you remove that. Sorry. Where did that class go? There it is. Let's try it again. Go there, press that. That's the one you want. So that thing references the design time view model right now, that namespace, and says, so I want the type for my design time data context to be my design time view model. And then you add is design time creatable equals true. You build it once. And everything fails. You mean that one? And everything just works. So all of a sudden I get information flowing out here from my design time view model. And the coolest thing, I know people will find me really, really a crappy developer for saying this, but I like using the UI for things like data binding. Like data binding is not hard. It's like curly brace binding and then like 15 different parameters. In store apps, you only got like 3 parameters, but if you ever come from WPF, you got like a whole bunch of them. But in this case, once I've got a view model, I can then select my list view. I can go back here to my properties pane and say item source. I can press that little thingy out there, say create data binding. And this thing says, oh, sweet, so you're data bound to one of those things. What do you want to bind to? Let's do tweets. OK. And it sets up my tweets for me as well. So we get all of this help from the UI, or from Blend and Visual Studio when we use these design time view models. And this is just a small little like data binding thing for one thing, but when you start getting like really complex applications, it becomes a lot more complicated. But being able to see what you're doing, and being that diviner guy in the middle doing Blend, being able to see that text with like at least faked information that's not just lorem ipsum stuff in most cases, I can see what happens when I change this to font. What happens when I change the font size, font layout, what happens when I change this, that. I get like live updates as if I was working with a real application. Next step, the designer goes off and hands off what he's designed. That will generally take a little bit longer to get to that point than the stuff that I just did. But the cool thing here is that the designer can actually sit and keep going with this. He can sit and spend loads of time while the developer actually starts building out stuff and starts working with it. Developer, well, he keeps going with building stuff. He adds whatever frameworks you need, dependency injection, all of that geeky stuff that we find so interesting, apparently. And the diviner then sits down with the designer who's handing off the design stuff. And this is one part that often gets missed. How many of you have been in projects where the designer, when he's done, sends over a bunch of PSD files or JPEGs to you and then just goes hands off? Quite a few of you. So when you get those JPEGs and those PSDs, do you get that part of his brain in that email that explains why he's designed it like that? I've never got that attachment. It might get stopped by something along the way. Because it's actually quite important to understand, why does it look like this? What's the thought behind it? Because when you come to part of the application, or the client comes back and says, I need this button as well, you can either then go back to the designer and say, hey, can you create another button for me? Or the diviner who understands how the designer was thinking can go, I think I know what he wanted, jump into Photoshop and just create another button, and you can keep working. When I used to work in New Zealand for a while, we had a company of 200. I would say about 130 of those were devs. They had 2 designers. They worked on every project we churned out. There were a few that actually used external designers as well. But we didn't, if we got something from the designer and they handed that off, if we came to a point in the project where we didn't know what to do visually, we were screwed. We couldn't go further because they were on like this 4th or 5th other project after handing off those designs. They had forgotten all about their thoughts and all of the thinking going into this design. So instead, having someone like me understanding and having sat down with the designer, I could go, I think this is kind of what he needed. It might not be perfect, but it's a start, so we could keep going. And demo time again. We'll just have a look at a little bit of a developer thing. Look at setting up dependency injection. So I'm going to create this project, because we do want to put all of our dependencies in a separate project and just dependency inject them. So I'm going to go, and I'm going to, once again, get that thing. I'm going to go, new project, get another class library, call it services. So those of you who went to my other session, you will recognize this. I'm kind of keeping to some of the rules that I set up, but not all of them. So I create this thing, and I've decided I need some entities in here. I need some form of data model to work with. So I created these entities called author and tweet. If you ever use Twitter, this is pretty much what you get. Like a text, the name of the author, when it was published, what picture the author has. Like, those are the important things. And I have a very simple DTO for the author as well, which is just name, handle, little introduction, profile picture, and stuff like that. So I just my models that I want to work with. And I go in here and I create a, I'm going to rename this to iTwitter service, like that. And then I want to make that an interface. I want to implement it. That. Very simple task-based service, nothing complicated at all. And I create a default Twitter service, not like that, but by going up here and saying create implementation or derived type. So I'm a little bit of a coward. I would kind of admit that. Someone told me that there would potentially be sketchy wireless or sketchy network connection while speaking, so you shouldn't depend on network. I heard that after deciding to build a Twitter client. Twitter is very much online. Twitter very much needs a network connection. So I've done it. I decided to cop out and do it differently anyway, and that's why I'm just going to add in my own Twitter feed. It's a XML file with all of my tweets. It's not going to be the most exciting Twitter application, I do admit that. I'm just going to do an embedded resource and put all of my tweets there. That is actually a good thing in 2 ways. First of all, I can just switch out this implementation for the real thing. But it means also if I'm on the airplane, which I unfortunately am a little bit too much, I can still work on this if I don't have a network connection. I can just plug in my hard-coded XML Twitter feed, and I can keep working on the application on the plane, and it just keeps working. So I've created this default Twitter implementation, and I've created all of the data that I need. I'm just going to go up to my actual application here and set up the dependency injection. And I use a little framework that I built myself, but you can choose whatever framework you want. Just going to find it. Oh, actually, it's out. Sorry, I just need to. I need to find this thing. Bitbucket. I'm at TechEd 208, I think. Resources. And I need my libs. So I got this, once again, just a little MVVM framework that helps me out with setting up dependency injection. So go and find whatever framework you need, but as a developer, that's one of those things you can sit and do and get everything working. Once you got that, I'm just going to make a little change in here, get it to work.
You're talking about MVVM Lite or something like that?
It could be MVVM Lite. It could be pretty much what you want. My personal thing would be if I had to make a choice, if someone blew up Bitbucket and my own framework disappeared and I got all my laptop stolen, I had to get someone else's, I would get MVVM Lite or Prism. Both of them are heavily, especially MVVM Lite, is heavily focused on this type of architecture where design time works. But if you get something like Calibre and Micro, I think the design time support at least used to be a lot worse. And I like to have my design time support. So I would suggest, yeah, MVVM Lite is good. So I'm just going to make it what's called an MVVM aware application from that framework. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to simplify this a bit by doing things like, let's actually just take all of this. Ow. There it is. That, delete it. Create my own app implementation. I thought I was just going to create my own app implementation. Oh, it's called Crowbar app, sorry. And apparently removed the whole class. So by using a framework, you can also simplify your code a whole lot. So this code is simple enough for everyone, even not having worked with store apps before, to understand. It's just a class. It overrides a little thingy here. If you'd seen the other code, you would sit and not work with store apps. You would have sat there and had no idea what it's all about. So I just abstracted away a lot of Microsoft's own stuff. And then I've got a little thing in here called register services, which is another override that I can use to register all my service in an IOC container. So that's all I need to get my dependency injection going for this framework. MVVM Lite has its own way of doing it. Calibre Micro has one. Prism has one. Prisms is actually, if you start doing Prism, is pretty much identical to this, which annoys me a little bit because I've been working on mine for 4 or 5 years and just started doing one for WinRT, and then they came out with one which is exactly what I wanted to build. So you set all of that stuff up, and this means now having dependency injection, I can register all of my services here, and I can quickly go in and say, I don't want to have the default Twitter service, I want to have a real Twitter service. I don't want to have this service, I want to have this instead. And we have one place where we've got all of these nice registrations, and it's really easy to go in and just see what services are being used, what interfaces are available, and switch them out as you want. And you can even add like compiler statements in there saying, in debug I want to use this, in release I want to use this, and make all of these cool changes. So I'm a firm believer in doing dependency injection, or at least inversion of control. Next step, well, I so far haven't built anything as a developer. There's no functionality going in here. I've gotten pretty far in like the foundation of my application, but the next step for the developer would be to start building the application. Develop a diviner? Well, hopefully by this time, potentially, he has got the visual design from the designer, he's got the ugly car crash UI that I just created, and he can start combining those and making sure that the car crash that I created starts looking like more of a Ferrari than a car crash. And also, before going, I said there's a little comment about HTML in there. You could, as I said once again, potentially use this for HTML as well. It does actually lend itself to that, sort of. But I'm going to focus on the XAML stuff. But if we start looking at what the diviner would actually do, the diviner gets this out of source control. And he says, OK, so I'm going to make this beautiful in some way. So he gets the view, and he right-clicks, and he goes, I want to open in Blend. I'm going to go, yes, I want to save all of that. He might want to open it in Blend, or might start in Blend, or whatever, but I would say that he's probably going to be in here in Blend and do his work. And once again, design time view models showing up, data showing up, the ability to work with things in this way, just awesome. So I go in here, I look at my list view, go in and say I want to edit some templates in here, I want to edit the items template, I want to edit the current, I get this thing here. I want to make sure. So I don't like the idea of having a show author thing. It makes more sense to actually click on the little avatar. So I cut that little button out, and then I go in here and I figure out my grid here. I paste my button, and for this awesome thing, it basically goes through and sets up a bunch of things you don't want. So you have to go reset, and you want to change the column on it. So it comes out here where it's supposed to be. You know that there's a lot of properties when you actually have to have a little search thingy to figure out what you're doing, but it actually helps out a lot. So I take that thing and see it's auto width, it's auto everything, it's placed where it should. Sweet. Next thing, I move it up a little bit in my panel here. Take the image of my data-bound image of my avatar, cut that out of there, go to the button and go, I want to modify that, so I'm going to edit the temp. No, actually, I'm going to. Yes, sorry, I want to edit the template. So I want to create an empty version of that. OK, that disappears. Paste that in there. Paste that in there. And all of a sudden, I have a button that looks like the avatar, and I can click it. It has a click event and all of that. Considering how slow I am doing this, we'll just close this thing down. I'm going to pull out this thing with some pre-formatted, a little bit more beautiful XAML. But this is kind of neat. I've actually redone the entire UI, not touching any of the functionality, not breaking anything. I've been able to sit here and redo all of that UI and get all of it to look the way that I want it, and I haven't touched any of the functionality. There's a complete separation. The diviner or designer can go off and do whatever they want. As long as they're data binding the right stuff, it will just work. And you can't really see much, right? So you're just getting these loading tweets and loading authors. Right now you're sitting there thinking, might still look like crap underneath. Well, the diviner knows code, right? He knows a little bit of code. So he can always go into the main view model and say, so loading tweets, nah. Loading author, nah. Save, go back to main view. Rebuild application, and it shows up, and it looks better at least. So the diviner can sit and make these little changes and make the view models behave like he wants them to. He can turn properties on and off, and he can change little values and rebuild. So he can do that simple stuff, and he can get all of this UI where he gets help of doing your data binding. He gets help seeing what's the word wrap on the different kind of mean sentences, and how does it actually look when I load this up with information. So to me, at least, that's a massive help. So I used to do a lot, and I mean a lot of HTML. And I came to the point where I could build this massive HTML page, and it would just be there in my head. I would know what I was building even if I was in Notepad. But now, being able to see what I'm actually building, every little change that I'm doing is just in real time being updated on the display, is just so much easier. So the next thing now is we need to go from stub VMs to real VMs. Because by now, yes?
Just to make the small projects, because we have talked about that, and what do you think about the fact that you cannot see what you're doing in MVC?
Okay, so the question is, what do I think about not being able to see what you're doing in MVC, for example? Awesome question. And the funny thing is, I think it kind of sucks, or actually I think it sucks a whole lot. But MVC has a little problem with the fact that you're using models that are dynamically created. What I'm suggesting to Microsoft, or rather I should say I'm going to, we've started talking about this at TechEd US, and you might actually chime in. How many of you are doing web development? How many of you would like to have the ability of doing a design time view model for your view in MVC and basically say, this is a mocked version of my model, and then be able to write HTML around that mocked model instead? Anyone? At least a few of you. That's kind of, because that's my idea. There's nothing stopping the Visual Studio team to allow you to do like an @design time model at the top and tell it what type it is, and then create these design time view models. So it should be possible. But my opinion right now, I think it sucks, because I want to see more. So I still have to build all of it in my head. So if I could, I would have that design time support. So there's like switching back and forth. So view model location. View model location is actually something that's not that hard to do, but people do it in different ways. This is the way that I normally do it. So I start out by creating some view models. So this is how you create view models. You find a folder with reasonable view models and you drop them into your project. They have the implementation. But if we look at like the main view model, you'll see that it takes an iTwitter service dependency injected into it. And how do we do that? Because normally when we go to our view and we say data context equals or it should be and then VM colon whatever, we're a little bit screwed in doing that because it will just create the view model with the default constructor. It can't actually take parameters. So we have to take one step back and introduce another object that is responsible for creating the view models for us and get that working in a nice way. And the solution for that, in my case, the way that I normally do it, is by creating something called a view model locator. So just put that in a utils folder. The view model locator is like the service locator, if anyone has ever used that pattern, but for view models. So I'm going to call it view model locator, like that. Then I'm going to make it public. And I will inherit from a class called view model base. No, sorry. First of all, I need to spell it right. View model locator base. View model locator base, I'm just going to quickly show that because it's about that simple. It's a class that defines one protected method called resolve view model. And the implementation for it basically just uses a service container or an IOC container to create an instance of whatever type you're requesting. So it's just wrapping an IOC container. That's it. Once I have that, I can then go in here and say, I can just go in here and say something brilliant, and it will just do it. View model locate. There it is. So then for every type of view model that I've got, I declare this property for it. And I just do resolve view model to get the IOC container created for me. Once I have that, got this view model locator, I'm just going to build it once. I go out to AppSaml. Another thing that takes a little while to figure out. So you have to go out here and you do utils view model like that, and I'm going to call it view model locator like that. So by placing it in AppSaml, it's available to the entire application, right? And that's what we want. We want to make it possible to reach it from wherever we are. Having that done, I can just go into the class for this, and in the register services, I'm going to call out view model locator setup, which basically just pulls the view model out of the resources and sets the IOC container to use for locating the view models or creating the view models. I've got some questions on why I put it into AppSaml first and then start mucking about with it in code, why I don't do it all from code. The AppSaml CS code will not run at design time at all. It will, however, run the AppSaml CS won't run at design time. AppSaml, the XML part of it, will actually run at design time as well. So any resource you put into AppSaml in XML will be available and useful throughout the design time experience, but anything you do in code will not show up. So why do I want it to show up? Well, for the very simple reason that I can now go into my main view. I can select a page, I can select data context, I can say data bind, and then I can go in here and say I want to bind it to a static resource in AppSaml called view model locator, and I want it to be a main view model. Create that. Visual Studio will then, on the fly, create this awesome piece of code. down here. So it sets up all of it, like mode and path and source and all this stuff for us. There is a shorter syntax for it that I normally write by hand, but it's just to show you that if you put it in the app XAML, it actually gives you support to get the design time experience for hooking up the data binding. And even though I've not actually pressed F5 on the, sorry, I can actually go in and press F5. I will do that. Application is done. I'm just going to, if I go in here and I say simulator, press F5, it pops this little thing up. It logs me in, shows my application. Then it closes my application, and it shows me Spotify trying to log in, and then I have to go back again. But it should be loading up. There it is. It's loading tweets. And did you see that there were little, like I said, it just jumps off here. Using that thing, I can just go and say, it actually has a little of a delay. So if I go in and I click the author, it has that little loading delay. That actually might seem like a trivial thing, but having a little thread.sleep, which you can't actually do in WinRT, you have to do a little manual reset event thingamajig to get it to work. But having that 1 or 2 second of delay will actually simulate that network latency that you will be getting. And when you start playing with the application, you will see what it's like to sit there and wait. You'll say, oh crap, I forgot to add a little spinning thing, or this is going to take a little while, I should probably have a little loading text or some information. Application done. So we've got this parallel way of working with it where we can do what the things we're good at, and then we just marry them up with view models being completely abstracted away from the views and vice versa. And then at the end, we can just put them together and it works. So how many of you guys actually believe that this will just marry up and work like that? Like 4 hands coming up. This feels awesome. You've now been in here for almost 70 minutes, almost 70 minutes, and you're all sitting there going, that guy is nuts. Never going to work. You know what? I can promise you it does. And this is not just something pulled out of my messy head. I have done this for 4 or 5 years now. It works. I've had clients, especially when I lived in New Zealand, that we built a solution for someone using WPF. And we built on top of this. We built on a ridiculously compressed time schedule a full application in WPF for them for a touch kiosk thingy. And about 3 days before it was supposed to release, they came to us and said, we have now updated the entire UI portfolio for our company. We need something else. We've got a new logo. We've got a new look and feel. Can you just switch out the entire UI of the application? We did it. It took a day. With this, switching out the UI. Okay, it was a small application. There were probably 15 screens. We could switch out UI and just have everything still working. Yes, we tested it through. There was not a single thing that functionality-wise broke in the application, switching the UI to a completely new look and feel. So it does work. A couple of potential tweaks when it comes to this would be duplicate views. So I had a company in Sweden who listened to me present this, and they came up to me, one designer and one developer, and said, can we be like guinea pigs for you? And I said, sure, anyone can be a guinea pig with me. I love poking people with a stick and say, do this, do that. So they did, and they for a long time, they started doing this, or for 6 months at least. They were doing this and experimenting, and they would come back to me, and we would talk about different things, and they would make little changes, and they would tell me what was working and what wasn't working. They came back and said, we actually duplicate views. We have one developer view, and we have one diviner view. So the diviner works in his view all the time, but the developer still has his car crash of a view. And then we have logic to switch them out when we run it. But the deal with that is that the diviner can then check in semi-completed views into source control when he's done for the day. He can make little things that break and then go back and change it again. The other way would be that he checks it in and the developer happens to check it out, and all of a sudden he's got a view he can't actually work with. They also said, using that, we can do automated view tests. They wrote a little thing that would go through the views, locate buttons and things like that, look at their data binding, and compare the developer's data binding for the different controls with the data binding from the designer's controls and make sure that he happened to change the data binding syntax using Blend, and he can make sure that all of the views would actually work, and they could set up that in their CI environment, and they would come back and say, this view is broken. You forgot to hook up this little command. You can use, Blend has this feature of adding design time data on the fly. It's little XML files. I do not like it. I just don't for some reason. It also means that, well, one of the reasons I don't like it is that it means that the diviner can sit there and he realizes, oh yeah, I forgot, I need this little property with information as well, so I'm just going to add that. And in Blend, you can just go in and say, so this view model now has another property of this type. That's awesome. There's just a little problem that there's a developer in there that did not get the memo that said that he should add that property as well. So all of a sudden, the diviner is building this thing, and it looks awesome, and the developer gets it back, and he runs it, and like half of the information is not there because the diviner has added a bunch of stuff on his own. So I'm not 100% sure of that, but you can have a look at it for simpler things. Just remember like little simple things like a master detail scenario where you basically have a drop-down, and once you've selected a drop-down, you get other information. Not possible with Blend design time data. With a design time view model, you can automate that and say, so in design time, I want to have this option selected, and that should populate these fields with this information. It's not going to work proper in the same way like this. What else have we got? Merging roles. How many of you feel like your company is going to be awesomely open to the idea that you're coming back after TechEd and say, we need to hire another guy? And yes, he needs the title of diviner. And they don't exist. And I want a unicorn for birthday. No, the thing is, most companies won't be able to go and get a diviner, but you can merge roles. So if you've got a developer that's really design, or at least a bit design interested, he can potentially move into that role. And if you've got a designer, there are designers out there, especially in the web space, that have knowledge of like HTML and JavaScript and stuff like that, because they've done production design in HTML. One of those guys can probably move towards the diviner role as well. And yes, the final one is a pet peeve of mine that I had to bring up. I don't like the fact that if you build this program now, I'm just going to check the clock. I used to be in Silverlight. You build this in Silverlight, and your design time view models will be in an assembly, potentially containing a bunch of images and extra data embedded into it. And that gets embedded into your ZAP file. And then you go online and you download this application, and you get a lot of bloat that you never use. So you don't want to have that design time assembly in your deployed solution. And that's why we use d:, in our XAML, because d: is basically the same thing as saying, ignore this as runtime. You can go into your CS project file and modify and say, do not include this when building. Works perfectly fine in Visual Studio and breaks in Blend. So Blend and Visual Studio have two different ways of handling project files, have two different ways of handling design time data, has two different ways of doing a lot of things. So don't get discouraged if it breaks at one point. Just look around the web, shoot me an email, figure out a way to get it to work in both, because they are a little bit separate at the moment. Blend is not just another skin on Visual Studio. It is a different product. And some small ideas would be, check out when it suits you to introduce the different roles into the project. Different teams have different situations when you can inject people into the project. I like to have the developer in the room with the client and the designer at the same time at the beginning of the project, so they don't sit there and do whatever they do and figure out this awesome technology thing that they're going to build that's never going to be possible to build. The developer can be in there and say, no, we can't do this. Or if you tweak it like this, it's going to work. So try to just play around with when you introduce them and when different roles enter the project and what they do. If you know behaviors from WPF and Silverlight, they're not available in store apps at the moment. There's an extension that does it. But behaviors is a way for you to add animations and triggers and stuff like that into your XAML views without building code. If you're doing a lot of applications in XAML C#, get a library where you store all of those behaviors, and then for new projects, you just pull that library in, and you can reuse all of these behaviors for the clients, and you don't have to rebuild them and do the complicated stuff over and over and over again. So it's a good way of reusing code. And yes, the stuff that I mentioned, remember the design time data differences between Blend and Visual Studio. They are unfortunately there. I have told myself and I've told Microsoft that I'm supposed to talk to them about it. It's just I've never gotten around to do it. That was about it. Questions? I have 19 seconds. No, actually, I've got 16 seconds left. It's been awesome to having you, all of you here. I hope you've got some information, something that makes you sort of take in, something that you can start trying when you get home. Any questions? I'm going to be here. There's apparently nobody entering this room afterwards, so any questions, just come up here. Any question that comes up later, email me at chris@59north. Go on Twitter at ZeroCall and just shoot me a tweet and ask. If you want to read about this, go to my blog, go back about a year, because last year I've done more Azure stuff on my blog. And if my blog for some reason locks up after one page view, close your browser, retry, it comes back again. Don't ask. I don't actually know why, but my blog is borked, and I'm moving it to Azure at some point. I just haven't had time. But basically, thank you all for coming.